A lot of the research in the beginning was virological, which is understandable because it is a viral disease. And it's a viral disease for which, in spite of the first effort started in the 1920s to find a vaccine for it, and so far, not too much success, which we'll be talking about later. So obviously that's where the research was. But now I'm glad to say that it's very much broader, and we have people who are doing research on epidemiology and control, and as well as all the virological. And we're very glad to say that at last we've got quite a lot of people working on the immunology, which is quite important when you're looking at vaccines. And we had a very broad spectrum of that. And we have, every 2 years, we aim to have a scientific meeting.
Welcome to the Swine Canada podcast show, brought to you by Wisenetics. We are dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions in the Canadian pork industry. So I'm Miranda Smith, and I'll be the host for today's episode. And with me today, I have Dr. Mary-Louise Penrith, who is an extraordinary professor at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. So welcome to the show, Mary-Louise.
Thank you very much, Miriam, and that's very kind. And yes, I am currently attached to the Department of Veterinary Tropical Diseases at the University of Pretoria as an extraordinary professor. And it means that I do a great deal of postgraduate teaching online. We have a lot of virtual courses because we serve a great many people all over the world with a master's degree in Global One Health, which we do in conjunction with the Institute for Tropical Medicine in Antwerp in Belgium. So I'm involved in that. I'm involved in quite a lot of postgraduate supervision as well. And I also provide the risk assessment component of a course on veterinary legislation and policy, which is really for South African animal health professionals. My main speciality, I'm a veterinarian. I only became a veterinarian after 24 years in zoological research because I wasn't able to follow my dream of being a veterinarian until I was quite middle-aged. But I have been a veterinarian since 1991, and I sort of specialized in pathology and got very interested in pig diseases, and am now considered an expert on African swine fever, and have done a lot of consulting work for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and the World Organization for Animal Health on African swine fever. And we live in Pretoria in South Africa, and that's about it.
Okay, perfect. So you are currently the president of the Global African Swine Fever Research Alliance. Is that correct?
That's correct. I told them I was too old, but they wouldn't accept that. So my sins, I am. And it's an organization that was founded in 2012 at Plum Island in the United States by somebody from the USDA, Cyril Gay. And I wasn't at the founding meeting, but I joined them in 2014 when they had their second meeting in South Africa. And it's an alliance of researchers on African swine fever in all the different branches of research on African swine fever from all over the world. So we have mainly our members are institutional. So, in fact, I think they really all are. And so the University of Pretoria is one of the member institutions. And in fact, South Africans have been quite overrepresented. I think I'm the third South African president in that short time because actually we have a long history of African swine fever, and that's probably why, because it was discovered in East Africa, reported for the first time in 1921, so it's over 100 years that we've been involved in it. the rest of the world is now also involved in it, but not so much as us, in the sense that we have a history. So we do have a lot of expertise, and we have done a lot of research over the years. A lot of the research in the beginning was virological, which is understandable because it is a viral disease. And it's a viral disease for which, in spite of the first effort started in the 1920s to find a vaccine for it, and so far, not too much success, which we'll be talking about later. So obviously that's where the research was. But now I'm glad to say that it's very much broader, and we have people who are doing research on epidemiology and control, and as well as all the virological. And we're very glad to say that at last we've got quite a lot of people working on the immunology, which is quite important when you're looking at vaccines. And we had a very broad spectrum of that. And we have, every 2 years, we aim to have a scientific meeting.
So can we talk a little bit about like some of the research innovations that came out of this meeting? So maybe first of all, like you mentioned earlier, research in vaccines. So I think a lot of people are wondering, how close are we to having a widely available and approved vaccine for African swine fever? Are we any closer today than we were 10, 20 years ago?
Actually are closer than we were about 20 years ago. And there are 2 registered for wider use vaccines that were developed in Vietnam in partnership with researchers from, they were then still at Plum Island in the United States. They are live attenuated vaccines, and live attenuated vaccines have a history because in the 1950s, the Portuguese in Angola started trying to develop vaccines against African swine fever. There'd been a lot of efforts in East Africa and even South Africa, no go. So they made not much progress in Angola at all. But when African swine fever got into Portugal for the second time and then spread, they started really seriously looking at cell-cultured attenuated vaccines. But unfortunately, when these 400 doses in Portugal were released into the field, and it turned out that it gave protection to a proportion of the pigs, another proportion of the pigs died because it didn't give protection, and another proportion of the pigs developed a strange chronic form of the disease, which was really difficult to diagnose. And that was bad news. And it also, the vaccine clearly got into Spain, or they made similar efforts. We're not quite sure what happened, but there was, unfortunately, and one of the chief vets admitted to that, and it's also been, so I can say that there was a cover-up there. I think many of them genuinely thought that the virus had mutated into something else, into a less virulent form, but it's not a virus that does that really easily. It can do it from time to time, but it doesn't do it very quickly or generally. So they realized afterwards it was the vaccine. So now we know an awful lot more, because when you attenuate in cell culture, you don't really know what you're doing. You just know that the virus is getting less virulent. Nowadays, with all the molecular genetics, they know exactly what they can take out, genetically engineer. If they do attenuate something, if something becomes naturally attenuated, they can have a look at the genome and see what it is that's different. So obviously these vaccines have a much better chance of being safe. But one of the problems is you test them in the laboratory, and you test them on healthy pigs, you test them on very young pigs, you test them probably on SPF pigs under very controlled conditions, and they work like a charm. You put them out there in the field, which was what unfortunately happened in Vietnam, that they let farmers get hold of it, and you're suddenly dealing with pigs that might be undernourished, they might have co-infections, they're different ages and production stages, And then you start seeing almost exactly what you saw in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s in the Iberian Peninsula, that you get this chronic disease developing in some of the pigs. So now there are 2 commercially available vaccines registered for use and approved by the World Organization for Animal Health, more or less. I say more or less because they're working on a standard now. But they're only registered for use in fatteners because one of them was somehow prematurely released to farmers, and it was not good, the results. Partly they might even have been vaccinating pigs that already had African swine fever, which wouldn't be helpful at all. But in any case, the results were not very good, so they've restricted it to fatteners. They're using it in the Dominican Republic. And they're using it, well, it's registered for use in the Philippines, and I think they have started using it in some areas, but only for fatteners.
So I think sometimes with vaccines, my understanding is that the problem is that now if you're testing a pig, you're not sure if it has antibodies because of the vaccine or because it was sick. Like, is that...
That is the problem. They have not yet got a DIVA, differentiate infected from vaccinated animals vaccine. There are some candidates which are looking really promising that were reported on during the meeting, but so far nothing that's commercial. And yes, that is a problem because the pigs with natural infection with African swine fever virus, pigs develop antibodies. They're not neutralizing antibodies, so unfortunately they will not confer protection on non-homologous viruses. So we have 23 genotypes of African swine fever virus, 24, but one had to be retired because it was a mistake, but 23 are still there. And there isn't cross-protection between them. So that is another problem, except that outside Africa, genotype 1 was the first virus to get out and be there and go to the Dominican Republic and Brazil and all over the place in the 1960s and 70s. And it has gone now. Sardinia was the last country where it had become endemic because of their free-ranging pigs. And they were finally recognized as free, self-declared in 2024. So there's no more genotype 1 outside, except that China, unfortunately, found 2 very old Portuguese genotype vaccine viruses in China. They emerged. Should we say it like that? Yeah. Anyway, but they are really old Portuguese vaccine viruses and causing a lot of trouble because they've also somehow been recombined with the genotype 2 virus, which was the one that's widespread now. And the genotype 1-2 recombinant is a very virulent thing that doesn't respond to any vaccine they've got. China, I think, has registered a couple of vaccines, but they're not used anywhere except in China. And I think they were close to registration at the gap analysis in the Philippines, so I think we can assume that they've probably been registered. And it does seem to be under much better control in China now. They're not reporting a lot of disease anyhow. And so basically we've got these safety issues with the live attenuated vaccines. So there are many attempts to get something that's safer and also that's DIVA, that is, we can distinguish. So far the subunit and inactivated vaccines don't give the same durable protection. And so they haven't been developed further. But some of the vectored vaccines, which are African swine fever virus vectored onto a bacterium or another virus, adenovirus is usually used, are looking very promising. And also some of these candidates are looking quite promising for being able to distinguish. So I think, yes, there's been a lot of progress, but the thing is that one of the big challenges with the vaccine is that African swine fever virus isn't happy to grow in any old cell that you can throw at it. It's very difficult to get cell lines, and there are some that have been identified, but there are not many that will sustain virus growth to produce enough to produce vaccine. So that's another of the challenges. It's a very big virus, and it's got so many proteins that there's still a lot of gaps in our knowledge as to what many of these proteins actually do. So all the virologists, they were reporting on all sorts of, yes, this one does this and that one does that, but it's still a long way to go to know everything about them.
Well, it'll keep the research community busy for a while, that's for sure.
That's for sure. We just have to hope they get enough funding to do what they need to do.
Yes, that's always the problem, isn't it? Okay, so another question that I have is, did any of the research suggest anything to prevent the need for massive culling of pigs if an outbreak occurs?
Yes, there are two very nice things that have come out of recent research. The one had been reported before at Garra, but they had expanded on it and done more work on it. One is a thing that you do in the field. African swine fever was fairly recently, it was realized that if you don't go and walk around your pig barn with dirty boots and so on, it actually doesn't spread very fast. So if you can identify early the pigs that have got it, if it gets into the farm, you can segregate them, you can kill them and remove them and bury them safely, or do whatever you do with your corpses, and make sure that the other pig, and then you observe the other pigs, and even pen mates are often not infected. And so you could, so they did some trials in Vietnam. That was done mainly in conjunction with the very outstanding and excellent researchers from the Friedrich Loeffler Institute in Germany, who do wonderful research on African swine fever. And they found that you could save more than 50%, considerably more than 50% of the pigs by doing it like that, from either dying of African swine fever or having to be culled. And that it only took, I think, 8 days longer to eradicate the virus than if you'd killed all the pigs. So they're doing that, and that was actually, I think the first efforts to do that were in China, and there's one published report on it. They called it tooth pulling, which is that you pull out all the bad teeth and then all the good teeth, because when you've got the huge pig farms that China has, you definitely don't want to have to kill them all and get rid of the carcasses. And I mean, what a waste of good protein. So that approach, I think, is going to gain traction because it's something that's been almost automatically used in Africa for a long time, because there's no money to pay compensation if you go and kill off the healthy pigs. And so instead you don't kill them and you just see what happens, and you kill. And often the farmers will say, well, if those ones are they look as if they're going to die, then kill them, but don't touch my pigs that don't look as if they're going to die. And it worked in Mauritius, and it's worked in quite a few places. So I think that is the one advance that's been made where they've seen that there is an alternative to this massive culling. But the other one is extremely interesting. It was reported on. I heard of it for the first time, and I think it was for the first time. It was one of the scientists, American scientists, who was instrumental in developing the Vietnamese vaccines. They have another approach, which is, I'm going to just have a look at a paper here, because I'm not a molecular biologist and I'm not a virologist, I'm a vet and a pathologist. But they use gene editing technology, and it's something that's been used in human medicine a lot, apparently, to design a therapeutic system that targets and cleaves multiple conserved sites within the virus. and it inactivates it means that it somehow reduces the virus replication because it targets sites including where there are genes that are for replication, and they limit the disease burden. And if you can inject this, you can have an injectable product. Then if you can do it quickly enough when an outbreak starts, you can save most of the pigs, because they did trials which showed that pigs treated via this approach are able to survive and to clear the infections with experimental infections with African swine fever virus. And this really does open up a very promising approach to limiting losses, particularly, I don't know how expensive this would be, but they say it's not so expensive. But definitely in big commercial farms, it would be an extremely worthwhile way of doing it, because they found that the pigs that are protected by this and recover, they have no virus in them. They do have antibodies, so they would probably have more immunity against the same virus coming back.
That sounds really interesting.
I thought that was hugely interesting. It was one of our executive committee who is working on this. I think he's on a good track there.
Well, both methods are promising, because anything that stops us from having to kill all pigs on a farm is a step forward, right? So
absolutely.
So yeah, very, very promising news. So then, what kind of emerged as the main focal areas for African swine fever research going forward?
The main focal areas will remain, obviously, improved vaccines, diva vaccines. I think they would want to go further with this gene therapy as well. But I think that the vaccine research development, I think what it did will have got a good boost from what was already explained at the meeting. And there's so many people working on it now. But I think the other thing that was very much at the forefront was innovative approaches to control and management generally in the field or whatever, because very often the traditional methods don't seem to be working terribly well. And we had a lot of presentations on the wild boar situation in Italy, and they create zones and then somehow it pops up somewhere else outside those zones. So it's like a moving goalposts fest sort of thing. And I think that what came out terribly strongly, I don't know, actually the keynote introductory speech to the epidemiology section, which was the biggest section and took the whole of the first day, which was very pleasing to me because it used to be all virology and half an hour for epidemiology sort of thing, but now it's quite different. What came out of that very strongly was that it's a people-driven disease. It's not something that comes from the environment and the climate and this and that. Yes, those things can contribute, but it's people who move that disease around. And therefore, it's people who can manage the disease too, because they can know what their actions are. And the keynote introductory speech to the epidemiology was that we need to focus more, not just on what's happening, but on the cultural and traditional relationships. He had particularly, it was on hunters in Europe, people who hunt wild boars, and the culture and traditions behind the actions that they take, and why they might be very unwilling to change them because they've been like that all the time. And we have exactly the same thing in Africa, that their cultures and traditions around pigs, it's the same thing in the Asia Pacific, very much so in places like Papua New Guinea, where the whole culture is pig-based. And what you do with a pig when it dies is very important. And it's perhaps not very good from the point of view of African swine fever management. And how to be able to develop communication systems that will really encourage cooperation with people who have got some kind of cultural and traditional issues. And for us in Africa, that's very important because we have areas where fencing your property, fencing off your pigs is considered antisocial, nasty, snobbish, and generally unpleasant. And then you start making more money, and that's even worse because you're not sharing it with everybody. And that's very important. You should share it with everybody, whether they own it or not. So I think it's very important to understand those things and to know that they're there and they may not be able to be changed. So how do you work your way around it? And that came out pretty strongly. And I think it's not exactly a gap, but in a way it is a gap. How do we improve our communication skills so that we can get everybody on board?
Yeah, and changing people's behavior is not easy. So yeah, we have a long way ahead of us. And like here in Canada, we work with a small scale pig producers specifically for that reason. And in fact, I know one here nearby where my horse is standing, and they were talking about just feeding food leftovers, and I was like, no, don't. But they don't understand why it's important, right? So we have a long ways to go when it comes to communication and making people understand that their behaviors may be contributing to the spread of this disease.
Definitely, but another thing is that we also have to, we've realized in Africa, because we're dealing with poverty such as doesn't exist in most other parts of the world, that if we can't just come and say, you must do this, you may not feed leftover food, you mustn't do that. It's not feasible for them. They can't keep the pigs if they can't do those things. So what do? Very good researchers in Thailand have done some research on what we've actually known for a very long time, but people didn't like the idea that African swine fever virus is very rapidly destroyed by heat. It's not very heat resistant at all. So the WOAH has a standard that meat that contains possibly to destroy the virus in meat, you have to heat it to 70 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. Now, firstly, these smallholder farmers don't have a meat thermometer. And secondly, they don't have enough fuel to cook anything for 30 minutes. It may be their own porridge, but nothing else. And these Thai researchers have shown that actually 5 minutes at boiling point, which is a visible heat measure, will do the trick for you. So why tell them to spend 30 minutes on it? The FAO, we've been trying really hard to get it down lower. We're sort of at the moment saying 10 minutes, 15 minutes if the volume's much larger. But in fact, we'd like to say 5 minutes because that would be enough. So, to make it more feasible for them. But on the other hand, I know that people will often, immediately you say do something, they say, that's not possible, we haven't got the money for that. And once you can look at it and say, look, there's some local things you can use that don't cost anything, say to make a pig pen or something to confine your pigs. Oh, yeah, that's true. There's all this brushwood around. We could use that. And people do use it. And you have to get them to the point where they see, yes, that can be feasible. I can do that. And because if you tell them they can't do it, to do things that they can't do, they won't do anything. They'll just go on the way they are. And so it's good. But when you're working with things like, well, it's taboo in our culture to bury pigs. Yeah, well, there's some very good developments. We didn't hear about any at the Garra meeting, but there are some good developments in composting where you can perfectly well destroy the virus in a very short time, a couple of days. You will still find viral DNA, but people mustn't confuse viral DNA with live virus because it's not infectious. And you end up with a useful product a useful and safe product that you can fertilize your crops with. And there's some very good publications on that. And I think it's these sort of innovations that we're looking for. And certainly we didn't hear about all of them, but we did hear about some of them at the meeting. And I think it's very good because people from all over are telling us their experiences, and then you can learn from each other. The only problem with a 2.5-day networking meeting like that is there's not much time for networking. We were doing more listening than anything else, which I think is something we need to look at a bit more carefully. But
make it a 3-day event next year.
Well, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea. People come a long way and it's expensive. And of course, having it in Rome, the problem was it should have been 3 days, but all the Europeans wanted to get back home on the day it finished. So they insisted on it finishing at lunchtime, but actually it would have been better to have just a little more relaxed time to be able to talk.
It's time for our famous 3.
WiseNetics turns podcast airtime into brand authority. We don't sell ads, we elevate voices. Curious how far your voice can go to become a reference in the industry and attract more leads? Scan the QR code and discover how we can turn your expertise into unmatched brand authority. Let's transform expertise into influence, starting now.
That's right. So then we always end with 3 final questions. So the first one is, what is your favorite swine-related book or resource?
Well, obviously, as someone who's really interested in the diseases, I think my favorite book could just be The Diseases in Swine. That's published. It's now going into its 7th edition. And I'm very happy to say that I'm part of the African swine fever in the 7th edition, which should be coming out fairly soon. But that gives you very good information on just about any big situation or disease that you need. But other good resources are definitely the FAO and the WOAH disease reporting programs, because, as I say, I'm more into African swine fever than the production side of things. On that side, I enjoy the Swine Web daily website very much.
Now, what about a favorite book or resource outside of agriculture?
Books, it's probably too many to even mention. And perhaps I can say something that's quite different here. My absolutely favorite resource for my work, it has to be my husband of 60 years, nearly 61 years, because he is my house husband. He does everything for me, the cooking, the shopping, and everything, and takes care of me so that I can get on with what I do and do everything that I do with African swine fever and with teaching. And of course, my other favorite resource there is our virtual library at the university.
Okay, perfect. Well, it's very good to have that kind of support.
Yeah, it is. Couldn't live without it.
Okay, and then the last question. In your opinion, what sets successful swine professionals apart from those that are not?
You know, for that, I would honestly say that good communication skills probably pretty much top of the list, that they can really communicate with people. And the other one is really caring about the pigs and caring about what they're doing. Because I think caring about the pigs is so terribly important, that they're not just numbers that make money for you. You really want the best for them, because that will mean that their health is best as well. And I've personally been very involved in welfare, and to me that is one of the most important things.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me on the Swine in Canada podcast show today. So that concludes another episode. So thanks everyone for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcasts to stay updated on future episodes. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review, because your feedback is invaluable to us. So this is Miranda Smith from the Swine in Canada podcast show signing off. Until next time.